often start our research with very essential objects that are associated with everyday living, also often carry a very sort of transgressive political message. Some of them might have been a cause of an actual revolution in how we function as a society in a more sort of collective, less individualist manner.
So the technique we use for the stove, often the whole family and the whole community would come and help. We speak about like this idea of like reenacting past gestures as a way to understand how things were made previously, and like through making and doing it ourselves we can understand more like how the material functions, and we try to like re-employ these materials but in a way that is difficult to place in time or anchor in a specific time period.
There is still a very strong tension between artisanal and artistic, and certain things tend to be associated with one but not the other, and then therefore are not allowed within the context of a white cube, for example, and we sort of enjoy breaking that boundary.
So in our practice we like to mix kind of like motifs and like actual imagery from our respective cultures, but also we like to mix folklore and stories from various cultures. We find it interesting because there's often a lot of parallels, surprisingly. The fireplace that we created for this exhibition is inspired by multiple stories, one of which is in Wales. There is a folklore history that a few hundred years ago they could build a house in one night on common land, and if a family was able to do that they could then claim the house and own the land. So we found this story really interesting in terms of like recommoning the land, or how you can kind of democratize like land ownership, and we see a lot of parallels with today problematics of like finding a place to live.
We were interested in the tradition of anarchist communities that pretty much originated in 18th, 19th century, and they would all be more or less based on the same principle, where a group of people would settle on a piece of land which sometimes they would buy, sometimes they would claim illegally, and it was mainly in response to the growing industrialization and a sort of an attempt to maybe find an alternative economical and political model, contrary to certain other movements that are present in the social media or science fiction or in general in pop culture, that sort of paints a picture of the future that is a bit more positive, where we sort of go back to reusing renewable resources, and where we somehow cut down on our consumption, and we go back to low-tech solutions. And we just found that this movement that is strongly coming back in the popular culture now has already been very present in the discourse around these communities in the 19th or even 18th century.
Yeah, I think what was interesting about like what interests us about these communities in general is that oftentimes we don't have access to the artifacts that were present, but in general we wanted to have a kind of speculative approach where we look at some of these objects that still exist that you can access, and then we wanted to imagine what we can't access, so like recreating almost like archival material which is not accessible because often these communities closed down and nothing was kept, and now people are kind of more maybe interested in what happened.
It's a sort of almost a historical science fiction approach when you take a moment in time, for example, a moment in which that sort of first experiment took place in the 19th century, and you ask yourself, well, what if it actually carried on, and what kind of objects could we have now if they actually were preserved?